It's really ironic that they list this research associate, Deborah Azrael, the name of the angel of death.
I noticed that too. A strange coincidence. What a perfect person to have in charge of a suicide study.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode 39, brought to you by Cook's Holsters, American-made custom Kydex holsters with a lifetime warranty and a 100% satisfaction guarantee, cooksholsters.com. Welcome to the show. If you're new to Armed Lutheran Radio, we talk about the Second Amendment, the natural right of self-defense, the shooting sports, hunting, all in light of the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's not just a gun show. It's not just a show about training or self-defense. It's about the ethical issues surrounding gun rights. And I'm blessed to be joined by a wonderful cast, and I hope that you'll find it informative and entertaining. And I hope you'll come back and listen again. If you like what you hear, be sure to stop by iTunes and leave us a review, or stop by our feedback page and leave us a comment. We'd love to hear from you. As I mentioned, Armed Lutheran Radio is a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network, and I would encourage you to check out the other great shows in the network. Starting with episode 40, we're going to be introducing you to some of the other voices in the network. Now, you've already heard from Paul Lathrop. He's the founder of the Polite Society podcast and co-founder of the Self-Defense Radio Network. And he shares his amazing story with us in Midweek Meditation number 4. Go back and check that out. Bob Main is the other co-founder of the network, and his show, the Handgun World podcast, has always been, it's been one of my favorites for years. He's kind of the average guy, the practical guy, sharing what he's learned about guns and self-defense, and I'm hoping I can get him on the show as well pretty soon. There's Liberty on Point with Tony Ray, Geeks, Gadgets, and Guns, Modern Self-Protection with Ben Branham, Gun Freedom Radio, Politics Daily, Today's Survival Show, Firearms Chat, I think is the newest show that's been added to the network. The Gun Blog Variety Cast with Sean Sorrentino is one of my favorites as well. Sean is from my home state of North Carolina, and his old blog, an NC Gun Blog, was one of my favorites. His work there inspired me to start blogging at the Armed Lutheran back in 2012, and his Felons Behaving Badly post turned into his special segment on his podcast. It's great stuff. Check it out. The Gun Blog Variety Cast. One of the co-hosts on the Polite Society podcast, Rob Morse, hosts the Self-Defense Gun Stories podcast, which is a really good show. Rob and his guests, they'll share some self-defense stories from the news, and they'll dissect them and see if they can discover some lessons that we can all learn from how those stories turned out, or what the people in those stories could have done better. And Rob is going to be the first of our special guests on next week's show, so don't miss that. He'll be on for episode 40. Anyway, you can check out all of the cool shows, listen to episodes, check out show notes, get links to the websites of the different podcasts by visiting selfdefenseradio.net. All right, today's show here at Armed Lutheran Radio is jam-packed. There's just so much stuff, I'm not sure what to do with it all. Sergeant Bill is sharing tips for using cover properly in IDPA. Aaron Israel is talking about all the creepy clown sightings and the overreaction by gun owners. Mia Anstine is on the road, but don't worry, she's going to be back next week. She got her submission in late on Sunday. I just did not have time to get it, and we had so much content this week. But she's got a great segment that I will share with you next week. John Correia is the founder of Active Self-Protection. in Phoenix, Arizona, and he's visiting with us today. He is our special guest, and he's going to be talking about an upcoming Bullets and Bibles conference that comes up this coming weekend. So be sure to listen for that. That's coming up. And Pastor John Bennett and I will be dissecting another article. This one claims without any scriptural proof that Jesus hates guns. All that is straight ahead right here on Armed Lutheran Radio.
Well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
With those words, our founding fathers changed the world. They launched an experiment in freedom, where common lawful citizens are free to speak and gather and worship as they choose. But first among those freedoms is the one freedom that makes the rest possible. For 130 years, we've worked to preserve freedom first. I'm Wayne LaPierre of the National Rifle Association.
Pistols, prayer, and potluck. This is Armed Lutheran Radio. Time now for another Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill Silvia.
Hey, I'm Sergeant Bill, and this is your Ballistic Minute. Today we're going to talk about using cover in IDPA. Okay, now the definition of cover in IDPA is 100% of your lower body is behind the cover, and half of your upper body is exposed as you lean out to engage your targets. Always remember that line from the center of the target to the cover extends to infinity, so don't crowd your cover. Use that distance. Sometimes moving from one point of cover to another, you'll see people that will run all the way up to the second cover position when really they might have been able to just take a couple steps and get into that line of cover and maybe take a shot that's a few yards further, but less steps equals less time, which equals faster stage scores. So don't be afraid to use distant cover. Now on your walkthrough, you're going to want to get to your position of cover and get your close foot into position. The close foot's the one that's closest to being out of cover. You need to go to every cover position, see where they're at, see where you need to be when you come into that position so that you're not going to get a procedural or recover call. Now when you're shooting and you go to that position of cover, you need to go into that position with bent knees. Keep your knees bent forward, kind of like you're sitting down, not with your knees out, because if you do that, you'll get a cover call because your knee or your foot will be turned out and outside of cover. Lean out from the waist up. You're going to want to keep your gun level, keep the gun up and down so that you're not disturbing your sight picture. So we know that as soon as you cant your gun, you start affecting the trajectory of the bullet as opposed to what you're seeing with the sights, and it can get kind of weird. So the easiest and best way to do it is keep your gun level. Keep your head and eyes level as well and behind the gun. Now, like I said earlier, don't crowd cover. I see lots of people that have their gun and their arm sticking way past that cover wall or whatever it may be because they want to get as close as they can to the targets. Well, you're not really getting that close, and you're actually, penalizing yourself because then you're going to have to pull your arms back around cover to move or whatever. So keep your gun either even with cover or behind it so that you can easily move without hitting the wall. So if your feet are in cover, your lower body's in cover, you lean out, your gun's level, your head and eyes are level behind the gun, and you need to move, you should be able to move without having to pull your gun in and move. Doesn't seem like much, but every time you have to pull that gun in to go to move, it takes a little bit of time. And if there's 4 or 5 points of cover, and then there's a whole match worth of those, it starts to add up. All those little tenths add up into seconds. The best way I like to describe it is, imagine that the bad guy, those cardboard targets, are shooting back. If they shoot back and you've leaned out to shoot them from cover, you're going to want to move back as quick as possible. If you have to first pull the gun in and then lean back into cover, it's not that quick. If you can just lean back, your arms and gun are still extended out and you just lean back in, it's a lot easier, it's a lot quicker. Now also, if you're not crowding cover, you can quickly and easily move to your next spot or your next point of cover. If you've got that good stance where your knees are bent, you're leaned out at the waist, it's an athletic stance. You'll be able to quickly and easily explode out of that position and move to the next one. So basically, when you get to a point of cover, don't stand up at that position, because when you're standing up tall, it's harder for you to lean around cover. It's easier for you to get a cover call because you're going to be stepping out and sticking your foot out or your leg out. Another common mistake I see is when guys are shooting from a position of cover and they run to slide lock, they'll lean back into cover with their upper body, perform their reload, and then lean back out. Now, tactically, that is extremely sound technique. But IDPA is a game. So when you're playing the game, stay leaned out, drop your magazine, do your reload, and continue shooting. It's only tenths of a second, but if you do 1 or 2 reloads per stage in a 10-plus stage match, and you shave off 0.2 of a second on each reload because you're not leaning back in and back out and all this good stuff, that's going to start to add up real fast and improve your scores. This has been your Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill. Keep practicing.
Sergeant Bill Silvia is a 15-year veteran of the Dallas Police Department and master-class competitive shooter. You can watch Sergeant Bill's shooting videos at armedlutheran.us/Sergeant Bill.
Can you survive the legal aftermath of self-defense? Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network can give you peace of mind knowing that you have the financial and legal assistance to face this new threat to your liberty, your property, and your good name. Become a member today for just $135 a year. Join Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network today. ArmedCitizensNetwork.com. Use the tracking code 15625 or Paul Lathrop.
Where gun culture meets the gospel. This is Armed Lutheran Radio. It's time for this week's self-defense tip from Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense.
Hey folks, this is Aaron Israel with Fundamental Defense here with your personal defense tip of the week. This week I want to talk to you about not succumbing to hysteria. Lately there's been a national craze centering around the age-old urban legend of the evil clown. Now whatever your feelings about how creepy clowns may be in general, I'm personally not a fan and never have been. This is simply not a thing that you should be worrying about as someone who's interested in personal defense and defense of your family and defense of your home. I've spoken to this audience before about the plausibility principle, but it bears repeating in this context. The plausibility principle states that we should be spending our personal defense resources preparing for things that are most probable based on where we live, what the common crimes are, and what our daily lifestyle consists of. When we have put in a sufficient amount of time of training and practice for those things that are most probable, we can then think about expanding out into what may be plausible but a little bit less likely. However, at no time should we be stretching our imagination to prepare for things that are neither probable nor plausible just because they may be possible, that we may be able to fathom them or imagine them in some far-fetched way. This principle is not only useful in choosing how to spend your training resources, it's also a good framework for not expending mental energy on ridiculous things. The possibility of an evil clown carrying out an act of terror is certainly possible. You can fathom it, you can imagine it, you've probably seen it in movies, but it isn't even close to plausible and is in no way probable or likely for anyone. Therefore, if you see a post on social media from an evil clown account threatening to attack children, you'd be wise not to raise your blood pressure too much over it. Now, if you feel like it, you can alert the authorities if you feel so inclined, but to take it as a legitimate threat that you should hold your child out of school for or get mad at school administrators for not canceling school, and I've literally seen these things happening, it's plain silly to look at it that way. Rational thought ought to make it plain that your kids are actually in more danger in the vehicle with you on the way to school with everything that happens on the highway than they are being attacked by an evil clown once they're there. I see a lot of armed citizens also posting things about how they would shoot a clown if they ran into one in their yard, at the park, etc. Now, if you actually get assaulted by another human being and feel that deadly force is immediately necessary, then by all means do what you need to do to protect your life or the lives of your loved ones, regardless of whether they're wearing a clown mask or not, if you think those defensive actions are justified and reasonable based on those things that we've talked about before as far as using deadly force. But understand that since this clown thing is a trend right now and Halloween's coming up, teenagers with their undeveloped brains, we all used to be one, right? They may do some stupid things like come onto your property in a clown mask or something like that. If that happens, follow the evade, barricade, respond principles we've discussed before, and for the love of God, don't go outside and shoot someone just because they are on your property in a scary clown mask, or if you see them in the public space. Think about what you could do versus what you should do and what you want to live with having done. And I wouldn't bring this stuff up if there weren't literally thousands of parents all over Texas and the rest of the United States freaking out about this obvious urban legend silliness. Even if you aren't one of those hysterical parents, you may have kids that have been affected by this trend. Maybe they've had somebody post about social media about I'm going to kill people at the school or whatever with the clown memes and all that kind of thing. Talk to them about it. And talk to them about the reality of it in the same way that I'm talking to you right now, and help them understand that, yeah, it's movie stuff, it's ridiculous, it's really not something to worry about, and then maybe talk to them about things that they should be worried about, or they should be prepared for, not so much worried about, that are more plausible to happen to them based on where you live. And just teach them about personal defense in general, and then if it happens to be a clown they have to defend themselves from, then so be it. In summary, don't be a clown by buying into the clown hysteria. Urban legends are to 21st century Americans what witch hunts were to 16th century Salem residents. It's much ado about nothing, and it's literally the same kind of nonsense. That's your personal defense tip of the week. Thanks for tuning in.
Aaron Israel is a Personal Defense Network contributor and owner of Fundamental Defense. You can find out more and sign up for any of Aaron's classes at fundamentaldefense.com.
Mission 160 Tactical and Armed Lutheran Radio are hosting Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense on October 22nd for a Fundamentals of Defensive Focus shooting class in Whitewright, Texas. Check the show notes for a link for more information and the website where you can sign up. Join me, Sergeant Bill, and Sergeant Mrs. Sergeant Bill for the one-day class for just $200. And if you use the promo code Lutheran, you'll save $40 off the class tuition.
It's the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Needs. I'm Alan Gottlieb, founder of the Second Amendment Foundation. When someone says we don't need that kind of gun, remind them the Founding Fathers determined what rights our Constitution should protect. There's a world of difference between rights and needs. It is not the function of government to tell us what we need or what we don't. Certainly no one needs an assault rifle or a Saturday night special, or for that matter, no one needs a Corvette with a high-capacity horsepower engine capable of speeds to 150 miles per hour. But in the hands of honest, responsible individuals, we have the right of choice. We have the right to read books others don't like. We have the right to listen to any radio program we choose. We have the right to dress the way we want to. We also have the right to own firearms of our choice. So the next time someone tells you, you don't need something, tell them it's the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Needs. Join the Second Amendment Foundation today so that this message and our Bill of Rights might live. Call 425-454-7012. That's 425-454-7012.
Welcome back to Armed Lutheran Radio. Active Self-Protection in Phoenix, Arizona has an interesting event coming in October 14th through the 16th. It sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun, especially for the Christian gun enthusiast. It's called the Bullets and Bibles Conference. And here to tell us more about it is John Correia, the founder and owner of Active Self-Protection. John, welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Man, I'm really glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me on. And glad to be here.
Well, thank you for taking the time. First off, let's talk a little bit about yourself. Introduce you to our listeners and tell us a little bit about what Active Self-Protection, how you got started, what you do normally, outside of the conference, what is it that Active Self-Protection does on an everyday basis?
Well, like you said, my name's John Correia, and I'm the founder and owner of Active Self-Protection. And we're, at our core, a firearms and self-defense training company in Phoenix. I travel the country, not tons, but, I have a full-time job. So full-time, I pastor a church in the Phoenix area. And I started Active Self-Protection in 2011 because I'm a teacher at my core. I taught undergrads and graduate students in seminary and Bible college for 9 years. And I teach. And honestly, I started it because I thought, man, if I teach a little bit of firearms, I could start writing off ammo and, memberships and guns and stuff like that. So, and it's just really grown from there. So the crazy part is the social media world has all but taken over everything else. So we have a very active Facebook presence and a very active YouTube channel. And my claim to fame now, I'm kind of a C-list celebrity in the gun world now, which is ridiculous. But so people send me real life surveillance video of defensive encounters. Those can be armed robberies, carjackings, muggings, stabbings. I've gotten sexual assaults, kidnappings, you name it. And I do after action reports on them, narrated lessons that we watch them. We talk our way through them, and then we go back through them, and we learn lessons. And what we find is we have about 800 of them now that are narrated, and I've watched, probably 5 or 6 or 8,000 of them. I probably narrate one for every 10 I watch. And we find patterns that emerge. And so I call myself an evidence-based defensive trainer because what I try to do, what my heart is to help people to have the skills and the plan and the attitude that they need that actually happens in real defensive encounters. So that's what I'm known for. So if you wanted to find our defensive videos, our YouTube channel, if you just search Active Self-Protection, or if you go to facebook.com/Active Self-Protection, you'll find us there. And we just try to help people be better.
Those are the videos. I recommend them I would recommend to anybody to go and watch because they are absolutely terrific. Very well done. I really appreciate them. All right, so let's talk about the Bullets and Bibles conference. It's coming up October 14th. It's at the Cowtown Range in Peoria, just north of Phoenix, right?
Yeah, it's in the greater Phoenix area. Yep, okay. It's in the north part.
Okay. Sounds like a terrific training opportunity, just the instruction part of it. Tell us a little bit about the training part, about the instructors that you have coming and the kinds of class room opportunities, coursework that students would have an opportunity to learn.
Yeah, it's interesting here in Phoenix. For most of the country, you want to train during the summer, but in Phoenix, you do not want to be outside in the summer. You'll die. So
it's like North Texas.
Yeah, right. So what happens is once everybody else is kind of inside because it's too cold, we decided to put this conference on. So it's 20 hours of instruction. We do all day Friday, all day Saturday, and then a half day Sunday. One of my things is that as a pastor, Sundays are everybody does these training classes on Friday and Saturday, or Saturday and Sunday usually. Mm-hmm. And Sundays are out for me. I'm busy. Yep. So, if I just ditch church one Sunday, I'm kind of conspicuous when I'm absent,
Right.
Can't just go, hey, I wonder where John is. Is everything okay? No, it's not the way it works. So, so we did half day on Sunday so everybody can go to worship, particularly so that I can do my job. And the classes, so I'm teaching every training session. So it's conference style. So we'll have classes Friday all day from 8 to 6, Saturday all day from 8 to 6, Sunday from 2 to 6. And they're in 2-hour or 4-hour blocks of instruction. And we're going to have students from all experience levels. So my specialty when I do training is what we call real encounters, where we take some of the narrated lessons and then we actually train based on what we saw there. Right. And so it gives us a realistic thing. So I'll do some of those. Some of them are basic fundamentals. My favorite class to teach is the things you really need to win a gunfight that I've seen again and again and again. So I'll do those. Now, those are me. And so in addition to me, it's conference style. So there'll be other instructors. We will have 2 other classes going every single class period of instruction. So I have instructors. I have to be careful because some of them, they have department regulations that they can't talk about their department.
Right.
So I have a federal law enforcement officer who happens to be one of my very best friends in the world, who has a list of qualifications about 57 miles long. And not only that, but he's the worship leader at his church. And so he's coming to do some active killer response training. He's coming to help me lead simunition training. So we're doing some that are force-on-force based classes. And he's going to help me lead those. He has a lot of certifications in that stuff. He'll also be doing OC spray course. So we're going to do a 2-hour introduction to using and carrying pepper spray. He's certified in that, so he'll be leading that. I have another instructor who is the very first instructor ever certified by Taser International to teach non-law enforcement officers the use of the Taser, particularly the Taser Pulse. And so we're going to have a course on the proper deployment of the Taser, which is pretty awesome.
I saw a video of you learning how that works.
Yeah, that was fun. Fun being a little sarcastic there, but I carry that pulse because I know what it does, and it's very effective. So we have a course for the Taser Pulse. We have one of the biggest training junkies you've ever met in your life. He's one of my administrators on my page. His name's Phil Wong. And Phil is going to be teaching draw stroke dynamics. He's a Masada Ayub group instructor. Be teaching draw dynamics, long-range pistol shooting. He'll also be teaching the law of self-defense.
Very
which
nice.
Very helpful to have, the pillars of proper moral and legal self-defense. We have a sheriff's officer here who is an incredibly accomplished firearms instructor, and armorer who is going to be teaching malfunctions. And so we have a paramedic who is going to be teaching individual first aid kit and trauma medical. It's a short course on controlling traumatic bleeding and putting together a first aid kit. We also have the folks from ZQI Ammunition who are providing everybody who comes gets 500 rounds of 9mm courtesy of ZQI.
Oh, fantastic.
Right? I mean, who turns down free ammo? And they have some really cool defensive pistol caliber carbines. And so they're teaching deployment of pistol caliber carbine and using that effectively in a gunfight, as well as using it from a vehicle. So, so we have an awful lot of classes that are going to be offered. And so I'm kind of weaving my way through all of those. So what I'm expecting is most students to take probably maybe about 8 hours of instruction from me and then take some of these other classes as well. So we'll be tired at the end of the weekend, that's for sure. But
I imagine.
In addition to that, so we have a champion barbecue team. And, I thank God for Mark chapter 7, thus he declared all foods clean. And they're included in your registration. They're providing dinner. We're having ribs on Friday night and brisket on Saturday night. And then a worship service on Saturday night. Dustin Ellerman, who's the season 3 winner of Top Shot, is going to give his testimony, and Bible studies in the morning. So it's just going to be a great time. I can't wait to do it.
That's fantastic. Now, and I was going to ask you about this. You decided to add this biblical component to it. Being an instructor, being a professor, a teacher. You're also a pastor. So tell me about some of these worship activities that you have planned for the conference. How you came up with this idea for this combination of what you were talking before we started, the combination of your two favorite things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, listen. My first and foremost passion in life is the Lord Jesus Christ. I mean, I didn't grow up in the faith. I came to faith as an adult. I became a Christian at 22, and a pastor at about 27. So. I said, look, my favorite thing in the world is to be a pastor. Now, my hope, honestly, what I've been working towards here for a couple of years now, is what I see going on in America is I think that bivocational ministry is the future, and I want to stop taking a paycheck from my church. So active self-protection is a big part of my strategy of doing that. And I thought, there's a lot of conferences out there. There's a lot of training opportunities out there, but especially I know a lot of people who are God-fearing folk who want to train, but taking a weekend away from their regular worship and all that's hard. So I thought, man, why don't we train not only our skills but our soul? And so what we decided was that on Friday morning and Saturday morning we would start really early, and we'd start with Bible study and prayer. And it's not going to be praise the Lord and pass the ammunition necessarily, but more on how to finish well and to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. How to make sure that we're focusing on the biggest priorities in life.
Right.
And so we're going to have Bible study on Friday morning, on Saturday morning, and then Sunday morning we're not going to have classes at all. And we're going to strongly encourage everybody to, if they're from here in Phoenix, to worship with their church family. If they're not, they're out of town, then they're certainly welcome to come and worship with us at my church. Or, I anticipate having people there. The church that I pastor is, we're kind of happy, clappy evangelicals. And, some folks ain't like that. And so, if you're, I can help you find a church in town that you can worship the Lord at.
Very good.
And then we pick back up at 2:00 and then train the rest of the day. And then Saturday night as well, after dinner, we're going to have a worship service. And it's not, my intent is not to make it a huge production and do everything there. But my friend who is, a federal law enforcement officer, leads worship at his church, is going to lead some worship so we can sing to the Lord. And then he's going, I'll speak a little bit, and then Dustin is going to give his testimony so that we get to worship the Lord on Saturday night. So the hope is that as we combine that we build some community, that people have some opportunities to get to know each other a little bit, that we train well and we encourage each other, and then eat well and then train our souls too. So, listen, in my world, Jesus good, firearms good, self-defense training good. You put them all together, it's got to be good, right?
Got to be good.
Got to be good.
Plus free ammo.
Right, free ammo, barbecues included, T-shirts, all that stuff. And Cowtown Range is a great facility. They're very free with allowing instructors who are certified instructors to do what they do. And so most places it's very restrictive, but Cowtown's great. They're like, look, as long as you have the insurance and the knowledge to cover yourself,
right?
We don't want anybody to get shot or anything like that.
Right. Fantastic.
They provide real opportunities to do really cool training stuff. So it's we also have this is really cool. The guys at UltiClip have provided a couple of free UltiClips for everybody. So their swag. They also messaged me and they're providing a devotional, a 365-day devotional to everybody who comes from Tony Dungy. So I'm excited to get that in everybody's hands.
Very good.
Yeah, there's going to be giveaways and all kinds of stuff. So, it's just going to be a full fun weekend.
That sounds great. I hate I'm going to miss it. Now, I'm hoping that you plan to do this in the future.
Well, this is a first one, and we hope it's a first annual. I think that we're learning a lot. This one's going to be a little intimate. We're not going to have 150 students at this one. This is a first of. So I hope so, and I think so. At this point, it looks like, we're going to do a couple things a little better next year. I'm already learning. And so hopefully next year's will be bigger and better. And this year's is going to be great. And hopefully next year's will be better yet.
Terrific. So for those who are interested, where can they find out more? How can they sign up?
So if you go on our website at activeselfprotection.com and you go into the shop, you can find the events there. You can also go if you go to get-asp.com/bullets. That'll take you to a promo page. You can see all about it. You can also go on our Facebook page. There's an event on the events tab of our Facebook page that you can find it at there. And that's probably your best places to find a bunch of information about it.
Terrific. John Correia is the founder and owner of Active Self-Protection in Phoenix, Arizona, where they're hosting the Bullets and Bibles Conference October 14th through the 16th. It sounds like a lot of fun. I wish I could be there. John, thank you for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Really appreciate you having me on. Thanks so much. And it's always good to know brothers in the Lord who praise the Lord and pass the ammunition.
Absolutely. Well, have fun. Let us know how it goes.
Sure will.
All right. Thank you.
So you have your concealed carry permit or license to carry. Now what? Now you need a good holster. Not one of those cheap neoprene prophylactic holsters you can buy in the big box stores. You need a holster custom built for the firearm you intend to carry every day. Check out cooksholsters.com. Made in the USA, Cooks holsters are available in a wide range of colors and designs for inside the waistband or outside waistband carry. They carry a lifetime warranty against defects and a 100% satisfaction guaranteed. Visit www.cooksholsters.com and use the promo code ARMEDPODCAST and take 15% 20% off everything in the store. You put in the time and effort to legally carry a firearm for personal protection. Protect your firearm with a custom holster from cooksholsters.com.
Pistols, prayer, and potluck. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Welcome back to Armed Lutheran Radio. Time for another segment of Clinging to God and Guns with our good friend, Pastor John Bennett. Pastor, welcome back.
Thank you, Lloyd. Boy, after reading this article, I have decided that I must get rid of my guns because I've learned that Jesus hates guns.
Oh, no.
So I've been living in sin for far too long. Time to end it.
Well, today's article comes to us from that cesspool of Christian heresy, pathos.com, and is written by somebody named Greg Garrett back in 2012. And Greg, according to BBC Radio, they tell us, is one of America's leading voices on religion and culture. Were you aware of that?
No, I wasn't. But, when I came across this article, and actually, for any of your listeners, if they want to read all the insanity out there, if they go to that cesspool, Pathos, just do a search for gun. And all the articles that come up, at least half of them are goofy gun control arguments. But he's got like 3 or 4 articles on gun control. And he quotes himself in each of them like he's some sort of an expert. So...
Well, it says he's been a contributor to Pathos since 2010. He also writes at the Huffington Post, Salon.com, On Faith, the Tablet Reform, and others. So it gives you an idea of just where this guy's coming from. This one's a doozy. This was written in 2012 during Obama's re-election campaign against Mitt Romney. It's pre-Newtown. It's all been motivated by the Aurora theater shooting and the shooting of Gabby Giffords. He's lamenting that we're not having some conversation about guns, and I'm going to skip through the first 4 or 5 paragraphs because it's dated and it's been proven laughably false. In the years since that article, we've just seen too many examples that blow this idiocy out of the water, so I'm just going to skip through that part. We'll get right to the meat of his argument, and as you'll see, this is just another typical a priori argument combined with the argument from silence fallacy. He basically hates guns. He tries to find approval for guns in the Bible. Finding none, he concludes that God hates guns too.
How convenient.
It boils down to. So here we go. I wonder about the fact that we don't have the conversation about who ought to have guns, what kinds of guns they ought to have, and if there is truly any need for anyone to have weapons and ammo delivery systems that seem to have no practical use except to shoot a lot of people in a short amount of time. So we're only, 2 sentences into this thing, 1 long sentence into this thing, and I'm already pulling my hair out.
For me, guns that are able to put a lot of rounds down range in a short period of time, there's the self-defense feature of it, but for me, it's about fun.
And as Alan Gottlieb reminds us in the Second Amendment Foundation ad that you will have heard earlier in this program, it's called the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Needs.
Absolutely.
So why don't we talk about guns, he asks? And I can give you an answer for that. It's because people like this author don't listen. They don't know anything about guns. They don't want to know anything about guns. They don't want to talk. They want us to shut up and listen to them, basically, right?
Yeah, you can't reason with them. I mean, you say anything that defeats their arguments, and they'll just stick their fingers in their ear like a 5-year-old.
Part of the problem is that whenever we start to speak, our arguments are couched in freedom language, the favorite form of American discourse. I have rights and freedoms, quote unquote. But as I argue throughout Faithful Citizenship, which I guess that's one of his fantastic books, or is that another article? I don't know. It must be another article.
Beats me.
It's linked here, so it must be another article. American Christians who primarily use rights and freedoms language when they make political arguments are neglecting to argue from the core of their faith. While God has made human beings free to make choices, and that has implications in how we live and how we govern ourselves, Christianity is not simply or even primarily about freedom. Christianity is even more interested in how we restrain our selfish impulses and take on responsibility for our neighbors, all of them, wherever they may be.
Oh my gosh. So the Christian faith is about becoming a social justice warrior. That's basically what he said here.
Yeah. We're called to love our neighbors, but we're not called to take responsibility for their lives. I mean, where does it say this?
By the way, that Faithful Citizenship, it's a book that he's published that has a whopping 9 reviews on Amazon. So
awesome.
Yeah. And here's the stupidity here. He says Christianity is not simply or even primarily about freedom. Then he goes on to say it's about, restraining yourself and responsibility towards your neighbor, etc. Mm-hmm. Jesus would disagree with him because Jesus said, if the Son sets you free, you shall be free indeed. So ultimately, the Christian faith is about salvation for one. But it's about the freedom that we have from the curse of sin, death, and Satan. So he's got it backwards. And if you read any of the fathers of Lutheranism when it comes to issues like sanctification, which is what he's talking about, with responsibility for your neighbor, good works, if you will, that all flows forth from a attitude of thanksgiving for the gift of salvation that we have. So no surprise, his thinking is very backwards here, but he's trying to set up his argument about how he's right and how guns are evil because somehow Jesus says so.
So after sifting the scriptures and the Christian tradition, I cannot conclude other than this: Jesus hates guns. Where, pray tell, is the scriptural support for that?
Yeah, you can't come to this conclusion unless the only quote-unquote scriptures are the ones that you're taking out of context, or the only quote-unquote Christian tradition is the liberal tradition that has come to gain popularity within the last 2 decades or so.
And the Bible does speak of God hating things. Very clear in like the Psalms and Proverbs. There are places where it's clear God hates things, but they're not inanimate objects. They're
right.
They're sin, they're wickedness, they're basically God hates evil.
Right. He hates sin.
Mm-hmm.
The gospel moment for this segment. God hates sin so much that he kills the Son for it, so that he doesn't have to kill us. Inanimate objects does not fit into that definition of sin. Sin can fit, as far as inanimate objects, the way they are utilized can fit under the definition of sin. But even good things that we would all agree are good things could be used in a way that's sinful. For example, gluttony. Food is very good. I don't think you'll find anybody that would disagree. If you go over to a third world country, I'm sure they would agree with you that food's a very good thing. But we see how people use it in a sinful way with either waste or gluttony and so forth.
Here is the theological reasoning about guns and violence from Faithful Citizenship that underlies my conclusion. He uses his own book to bolster his conclusion. Jesus calls us to rise above our worst impulses, above our fear and anger, as he did. No, that's not what he calls us to repent and to believe in him.
Yes. Yes. Well, and this is the problem with liberal Christianity in general, is that it is completely void of the gospel. It's all about telling you how you must live your life, which is exactly what he's doing. He takes this entire article to lecture us about how we ought to be living instead of proclaiming the love of Christ that is demonstrated in his sufferings, death, and resurrection. But that's liberal Christianity for you. Go into any of these mega churches where they have, 10, 20, 30,000 members, you won't hear the cross proclaimed from the pulpit, if they even have a pulpit, but you won't hear the cross. You won't have a confession of sins. You won't have absolution. You'll have practical advice for what could, in many cases, be considered quote-unquote godly living. And that's all it is.
It's pietism.
Absolutely. It's pietism on steroids. And the sad part about it is that there are many lost opportunities by these people who have a large audience and many people that they are reaching because they are failing to proclaim Christ and Him crucified. So I would hate to be standing in their shoes on Judgment Day when Jesus says, "Depart from me, you workers of iniquity."
Jesus reframed the traditional teachings of Hebrew justice, an eye for an eye. He argued against the natural human response to hate those who were outside the tribe. Again, there's why we don't have a conversation. This guy is clueless. Right. Lawful gun ownership isn't about hate. And self-defense is not revenge. It's not an eye for an eye.
Right.
In his teachings, he preached love, mercy, and compassion, and he reached out to include those who were reviled and hated by other Jews, Roman collaborators like tax collectors, prostitutes, and notorious offenders against the Jewish piety codes, sinners of all sorts. More importantly, Jesus lived a life of peace, even when faced with the ultimate challenge, acting in self-defense to save his own life. And here we go again.
Jesus did that willingly for the purpose of redeeming our sorry butts. He did it not because he was a pacifist and was trying to teach pacifism as the only way to live. He did it to redeem us from our sin and wretchedness.
Although the just war theory developed hundreds of years later would have authorized force to protect innocents, Jesus instructed his disciple to put away his sword when the authorities came to arrest him, saying that violence was not the answer.
He told Peter to put away his sword because he was willingly going to the cross, doing that for the salvation of our souls. But I guess I've been wrong all along. Jesus was just doing that to teach pacifism.
In the account of his arrest in Matthew 26, Jesus even spoke of the legions of angels he could call from heaven if he chose, a number so substantial it would have overwhelmed the legions of Rome, and not only saved Jesus, but rescued the Jewish people from outside domination, which many of his followers prayed their Messiah would do. And I don't know that I can read this passage about armed angels as literally true, but it most certainly is a spiritual truth. Jesus was saying that he did not have to subject himself to indignity, violence, and death.
That is utter stupidity. Because Jesus, on multiple occasions, when he's telling his disciples what's going to happen when he goes to Jerusalem, later on, he says that it is for this purpose, that is, for the purpose of the cross, that he has come to this hour when Jesus is praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. My gosh. So Jesus was simply saying that he did not have to subject himself
to the indignity of defending himself. Right. Yes. Well, in the guy's byline, it credits him with writing over 20 books. And this is proof that you can write 20 books and still be a complete idiot.
Well, as I mentioned at the start, this particular article, the third page, is almost identical to the third page of all the other articles he had on Pathos about gun control. So, maybe all of his books are just, he uses a random word generator with his one book, and it just reorganizes everything, and he calls it something else.
And yet, he was choosing to reject violence and coercion for the better and harder way of love.
And what might that be? He doesn't actually tell us here.
Yeah. No mention of that. Strange.
Well, and Jesus actually wasn't rejecting violence. He was embracing the violence that was to be committed against him.
But he never explains why. Well, of course he wouldn't explain why, because that would completely scuttle his whole argument. So,
Don't bring up the cross. It might make you look like an idiot. That seems to be their reasoning here.
The example of Jesus' life is that we should trust God and not fear violence. As countercultural as that example remains, as counterintuitive as it may be, I do believe that, as Dr. King said, violence is a dead end and that it should not be celebrated, even when it makes me less afraid, even if some part of me believes it is deserved.
No, we actually come to something that I would agree with. But the conclusion is that because we are not supposed to fear violence, that we are then to be utter pacifists and completely subject ourselves to the violent intentions of others.
We shouldn't fear the violence that's coming our way, so we should just lay down our arms, give them up.
Yeah.
The Christian tradition presents three possibilities, at least one of which suggests a legitimacy to resist violence with violence in some cases. Oh, so now we're conceding that using violence is okay. But wait a minute.
Well, he says the Christian tradition presents three possibilities. Three possibilities for what? And what are these three possibilities? He doesn't even tell us.
He doesn't even get there.
But somehow this all adds up to Jesus hates guns.
That's right. At least one suggests that there's a legitimacy to resisting violence with violence, but Jesus hates guns. Makes perfect sense. One question remains. Does the tradition suggest that guns be widely available in America, as those arguing an absolute right to bear arms suggest? I don't think so.
Let's take a look at this critically from a historical perspective. If you look back to first century, what was the equivalent of today's firearm? Something like a sword, maybe?
It was a pokey thing, yeah.
Yeah, a sharp pokey thing, and not sticks, but something more of a metallic nature. Anyway, enough sarcasm. In that the text from Luke that we've looked at, that where Jesus instructs his disciples, whoever does not have a sword but has a tunic will sell it, etc. Right. The word that's used there for sword is a reference to a short sword, not like these, some big broadsword that some Roman centurion might be dragging around, but a short sword, what we might call a dagger, something that would have, had a blade of 12, maybe 18 inches at most. And that was what was commonly carried by your average citizen living in first century Roman society. Anybody who traveled often carried one of these, daggers or short swords because of the problem with highway robbers that was very prevalent in first century. So I hate to break it to that guy, but the culture that Jesus lived amongst, it was a well-armed culture. Most males would have carried, if they could afford to, a bladed weapon of some sort on their person whenever they were in public. Right. So this absolute stupidity and ignorance, but it's willful ignorance that he doesn't want to consider the ramifications of his stupid arguments.
Using the I am third rubric that models Augustine's twofold commandment for us, there seems to be no warrant for so many guns to be available to so many.
That makes no sense at all. He uses this I am third quote. Again, he uses this in all the articles that he has on gun control.
This is one of his repeat lines?
Yes. In fact, from here on out, it's basically almost verbatim of his other articles. This I am third concept is that God is first, my neighbor is second, and I am third. So he says this I am third without really explaining what he means by I am third, and because I'm supposed to be, third in the order of primacy, that means I can't own any guns. So, in other words, I'm showing deference to my neighbor, aka the guy who wants to come in and rob me, by not owning a firearm.
Not just that you can't own them, but they shouldn't even be available.
Yeah. Should not be available, he says. And the reason they shouldn't be available is because Jesus hates guns. We need to understand that.
How does the availability of legal guns have an effect on our love for God or our neighbors?
It doesn't, except for the individual who owns a firearm for the purpose of willfully and intentionally doing harm to others.
I mean, there's so much in the Bible that God is clearly explicitly opposed to, murder, theft, deceit, sexual immorality, that stuff. But never once is the availability of weapons mentioned in the Bible.
Right.
What is Augustine's twofold commandment thing? I would assume this is our division of the commandments, the love God and then love your neighbor as yourself, right?
Service to our neighbor is ultimately service to Christ. Going back to Matthew 25, where Jesus is talking about the day of judgment when I was naked and you clothed me, I was sick and you visited me, et cetera, et cetera. That right. Insofar as you've done it to the least of these, my brethren, you have done it unto me. That's the aspect that Augustine looks at. And because of faith and in gratitude for what Christ has done for us through his cross, through his death, through his resurrection, we then do owe service to God by serving our neighbor. And Luther argues the same way. Not that it is required for salvation, but it is a part of faith.
Bob Herbert, who says we live in an insanely violent society, cites the disturbing statistic that in the years since 9/11, 150,000 people have been killed by gun violence in America. I'm not laughing at the statistic. I'm laughing at the killed by gun violence thing. That's just the way that's written is so annoying. The equivalent in murders of a terrorist attack on the Super Bowl or the atomic destruction of a small city. We've suffered more than 1 million American murders since 1968, that horrible year when Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. were just the most high-profile victims. Love for our neighbors suggests that we may and should accept restrictions on some absolute right to bear arms in order to protect our neighbors. No.
It doesn't protect anyone. It places individuals in harm's way. How many stories have we seen where the waiting periods that are mandated in some states were directly linked to the death of someone because they couldn't buy that firearm when their life was in danger and they knew it was. They were stuck on the 10-day waiting period, and in that time, someone came and killed them. And
that, again, points to the reason that we don't want to have this conversation is because they don't know anything. This suggests in this one sentence, we should accept restrictions on some absolute right to bear arms, as though we don't already have a crapload of restrictions.
Right. There is no absolute right to bear arms because our government has highly restricted it. It used to be if you wanted to buy a fully automatic rifle, that you didn't have to have any special licensing from the federal government. You didn't have to pay any taxes to the federal government, that you can just go out and buy one.
You didn't have to ask for permission to exercise your rights.
In fact, the absolute right to bear arms is one that has completely gone away, and now it's a restricted right to bear arms. You didn't have to go through a background check to buy firearms at one point. You could just walk into your neighborhood hardware store, take a rifle off the shelf and go to the cashier and pay him the asking price and walk out the door.
And yet somehow blood wasn't running in the streets and we didn't have mass amounts of quote unquote gun violence.
We lived in a much saner age then, it seems.
The NRA and its allies are fond of the slippery slope fallacy. The argument that banning, say, assault rifles or enormous ammo clips, such as the shooter of Gabby Giffords is accused of having employed in the Tucson shootings, will lead to Americans losing their hunting rifles or target pistols. It's called a fallacy for a reason. Controlling armaments that have, as the New York Times puts it, no legitimate purpose outside of military or law enforcement use does nothing to prevent Texans or Tennesseans from hunting deer.
He's talking about fallacies when his entire argument is a fallacy from the beginning to the end.
Again, this is why we don't want to have this discussion, because he's an idiot. He's using this term enormous ammo clip, and he's talking about hunting rifles and target pistols and quoting the New York Times. who says that there's no legitimate purpose for these guns. The Second Amendment has nothing to do with hunting deer or target shooting.
Right. And we've discussed this before. Read the Founding Fathers, read Mason, read Madison. The purpose of the Second Amendment was so that the populace could be well armed in case they were faced with a tyrannical government like they had just been dealing with Great Britain. So willful ignorance. I don't know. Maybe it's not even willful at this point. Maybe he's just plain ignorant.
I come from a ranching family in Oklahoma, he says. I have shot targets and animals. I know card-carrying members of the NRA and love some of them.
Only some.
Only some.
That means he hates the others, I guess.
How Christian.
Here he's talking about how the whole purpose, is to love one another, and now he's only saying he loves some of the NRA card-carrying members. This again is a paragraph that's almost verbatim in his other gun control articles.
And I believe they are simply wrong about this slippery slope, which is a freedoms argument, not a faith argument in any case. We just talked about how easy it used to be to buy guns. There's your slippery slope. Proven. When you could, not that long ago, 40 years ago, you could buy a gun without a background check. 40 years ago, you could buy a gun and have it shipped to your house. The slippery slope has led to us having to ask for permission to exercise our Second Amendment rights. To beg the government for our rights. That's what I concluded in the aftermath of the Tucson shootings, and nothing since has changed my mind. If anything, I believe it even more strongly. Maybe we could not have stopped the Aurora shooter from killing people. Didn't want to mention his name there. Maybe, but I defy anyone to find a passage from the Gospels that suggests to anyone that Jesus would advocate the availability of weapons whose only purpose is to kill other people. This is that fallacy that if the Bible doesn't specifically allow something, it has to be forbidden.
Yeah, well, and notice that it's the weapons that are killing people, not the people that are killing people.
Mm-hmm. I defy him to find a passage from the Gospels that suggests that Jesus advocates the banning of types of weapons or limiting the availability of weaponry. Let's turn that around.
All those passages that weren't recorded.
Oh, it must be in those other Gospels.
Yeah, it must be like the Gospel of Thomas or the Gospel of Mary Magdalene or one of those. But again, we go to Luke's Gospel where Jesus specifically instructed his disciples to buy swords, but I mean those must have been like plastic swords or something, because certainly Jesus wouldn't have advocated them getting weapons that would be used to kill other people.
I think the original translation is Nerf.
It's ironic because he spends all this time trying to tell us or convince us that Jesus hates guns, but not once does he quote the scriptures. Yes. So at the end of the day, Jesus only hates guns because he says so, not because Jesus said so.
Imagine that. The Prince of Peace, the innocent victim of violence and torture, is not down with 100-bullet ammo drums, AR-15 assault rifles, or any of the other legal paraphernalia of mass shootings that are selling out in the wake of the Aurora massacre. Jesus hates guns, and our politicians ought to do something to impose even a little more justice in this sinful world.
He says that the Prince of Peace is not down with, AR-15 rifles and bullet drums and all sorts of other stuff. But isn't the majority of these mass shootings committed with handguns?
And more people are killed with hands and feet and blunt objects than all sorts of long guns combined. And to answer his final sentence there, our politicians ought to do something to impose even a little more justice in this sinful world. I can think of a few ideas, like maybe, locking up criminals and making them serve their full sentences, or maybe not paroling felons who commit crimes with guns, or maybe not selling guns to Mexican drug cartels, or...
Yeah, no kidding. How about not letting these illegal immigrants back into the country when they've been deported several times for them just to come over and kill innocent people?
I thought we couldn't top last week.
You're welcome.
You found another doozy. Final thoughts on this one?
Jesus doesn't hate guns because nowhere in the scriptures does it say that Jesus hates guns.
Amen.
Jesus hates murder. Jesus hates all sorts of violence. Jesus hates sin.
Yep.
But guns aren't sinful. They're an inanimate object. So Jesus can't hate them. He just hates it when they're used in sinful ways.
He doesn't hate them any more than he hates knives or swords or baseball bats or fists.
Amen to that.
Well, thank you for joining us again and fisking another one. And thank you all for joining us again. And please be sure to join us next time for another segment of Clinging to God and Guns right here on Armed Lutheran Radio. And that's going to do it for today's show. Thank you to our contributors, Sergeant Bill Silvia, Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense, and Pastor John Bennett of St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. And thanks to our special guest, John Correia from Active Self-Protection in Phoenix, Arizona. And Mia Anstine will be back with a tip for us next week. I'm headed to Perryville, Arkansas with Sergeant Bill and Mrs. Sergeant Bill for the 2016 Fall Brawl next Saturday. And we'll tell you all about that on next week's show. Until then, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Armed Lutheran Radio. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, and TuneIn. This podcast is made possible by Cook's Holsters and contributions from listeners like you.